How's it going, everyone? I'm Crysis, and if you couldn't tell by now, I really like movies. Same as last month, I saw a lot of movies, some might even say too many, but when you have as many free tickets as I do a week, you take massive advantage of that if you can. I can't think of anything else to stall for this month, so let's just get right into it. The first movie I saw this month was on the first of the month. Good old April Fool's Day, and boy, did I play quite a prank on myself by seeing The Woman in the Yard. Originally, I was going to make this review a bit of a joke because of what I had heard about it, about how it wasn't a great movie, blah blah blah, yada yada yada, whatever, April Fool's Day, right? And then I saw it. I'm not going to dignify this movie's existence with an actual review, except to say that it was insulting. The message that this movie tries to give is awful, and I genuinely would love to know how the hell this made it out of the pitch room. I'll leave this with just 3 words. Fuck this movie. 0 out of 10. Oh, and they kill the dog, so double fuck this movie. Getting the bad taste of that out of my mouth with one of 2 horror movies set at a summer camp for the month of April, and part of the first doubleheader of the month, I ended up watching Hell of a Summer. Now tell me, what happens when you get a pair of first-time writer-directors that also star in their movie with a bunch of relatively unknown actors? Apparently, Hell of a Summer is what you get. While it wasn't necessarily bad per se, the story was very predictable, and I feel as though the identity of the killer was revealed a bit early for this kind of story. Every character felt like a major stereotype, from the preachy vegan to the occult liking goth girl to the attention seeking influencer type girl. It just felt very one note for every character, which led to me not really caring who lived or died throughout the movie. Again, not necessarily bad, but you can tell that this was the writing pair's first movie, so I'll give it a 4 out of 10. The second movie of that horror doubleheader was one that I wasn't expecting to be as fun as it was, the Steamboat Willie horror movie titled Screamboat. On an ironic level, this movie is great, taking the piss out of Disney movies by dropping song titles in strange places, calling back to the Steamboat Willie whistle tune, and some honestly really great death scenes. On a more serious level, though, while I get that this is definitely an indie movie from the quality of the special effects, it still did not look that great on the big screen. The acting felt like something you would see in a soap opera on CBS at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the design of Screamboat Willie, as he's called in the credits, and the abundance of gore just felt like they were trying to be edgy with their slasher horror rather than trying to be accurate with their deaths. I almost want to put this into a so bad it's good category, but that doesn't mean it'll get a very high score. So it'll get just higher than the one before it at 4.5 out of 10. For the fourth movie of the month and the first of the second doubleheader of the month, I got a ticket in IMAX to see the movie that is the bane of every theater employee's existence in April, a Minecraft movie. And it was... Well, I couldn't even hear about 20% of the dialogue because of the audience in the showing that I was in. They cheered and clapped and were obnoxious for every single meme in that movie, and that was on opening night. God, this movie pisses me off. For the review of the movie itself, though, maybe it's because I don't really play Minecraft, but this movie wasn't even really ironically good like the FNAF movie was. When you cast an actor like Jack Black and let him run wild in his role, none of the other actors can match the energy that he brings, and that just brings the whole movie down with it. Additionally, the acting from 3 out of the 4 non-Steve characters just felt stiff and wooden throughout the movie, which pulled me out of it a lot. Plus, when the characters are in the overworld, it was so uncanny seeing them against the CGI backdrop and other characters, which honestly didn't even look bad on their own. It just pulled me out of the movie even more. Something that I might get grief for is that I don't think the whole subplot with Jennifer Coolidge and the villager needed to be in the movie. It took attention away from what was actually important that was happening, and its resolution served as one of the least fulfilling mid-credit scenes I've seen in a while, and I have seen every single Marvel movie. It just wasn't a very good movie, so it's going to get a 3.5 out of 10. The second movie of that doubleheader was something significantly calmer, a nice movie about a dog named The Friend. It was so calm and relaxing in spite of the context of the movie, even in some of the more stressful bits. Plus, I'm sorry, but there's just something about seeing a sad Great Dane that makes me love the movie even more. It is a really cute story, too, of a woman learning to love something she was never a fan of after the dog's owner passed away. And the fact that they used a real dog instead of, well, not a real dog, sold the movie even more because he was such a good boy. Just a big, sad, good boy. The acting was solid from the whole cast, most of all Bing, the Great Dane that was used for Apollo. He was just such a good boy, and I cannot stress that enough. The Friend gets a friendly 10 out of 10, and no, that's not just because of the dog. The next day, I walked into the theater to watch Freaky Tales, starring Pedro Pascal and Ben Mendelsohn, and it's such a strange movie to review because it's technically 4 20-minute movies that very loosely relate to each other. Each of the stories is decent in its own right, but it was such a loose connection between each story that it's just not a great through line. The acting is decent, and I will never envy any actor that has to deliver slurs in any movie due to the time period of said movie. This movie is particularly strange because it gives the vibe of an indie movie with the look of a big studio movie, and those contrasting vibes were a bit strange throughout the movie itself. Overall, though, it wasn't bad necessarily, just very, very weird, or, as the title implies, freaky, so it's going to get a freaky 6.5. Following the Freaky Tales, I felt a bit lucky, so I decided to check out The Luckiest Man in America, and boy was that luck warranted. You know, you wouldn't think that a movie about the taping of a game show episode would be good, even with the mystery and intrigue that are dealt with here, but this was a fun ride from beginning to end. Everyone in the cast did fantastic in their roles, especially Paul Walter Hauser and Walton Goggins, though I feel as though Hauser is getting typecast as the awkward, potentially shady guy in most of the projects that I've seen him in. The story is engaging enough to keep your attention throughout the whole movie, even in the slower moments when they're not focusing solely on the game show. The investigation into Hauser's character is done well, and the aftermath of the rushed judgment of the producers is shown very clearly toward the end of the movie. It did start to drag toward the end, but the clip of the actual episode during the credits was a very nice touch. With everything in mind, I'll keep my luck where it is and give this one an 8.5. I lucked out with a decent movie the next night with the first screen unseen of the month in Drop, starring Megan Fahey and Brandon Sklenar. Once again, I wish I hadn't seen the trailer for this before seeing it, because if I hadn't, I would have been more engaged with the movie rather than knowing what was going to happen next. That being said, it is still a good movie in its own right. The acting was solid from everyone in the cast, with the dialogue actually being believably awkward for a first date, an overly energetic waiter on his first day, and sibling dialogue that didn't feel like it was written by an only child whose only experience with siblings is Pride and Prejudice. The effects of the texts being sent to the main character were amazing, honestly, even being reflected in mirrors at certain points during the movie. While not a perfect movie by any standard, it's still just a fun mystery thriller movie about a first date, although I will say the man had a lot more patience than I would have. Luckily, at least for me, this disaster of a first date movie was not a disaster in and of itself, so it's going to drop in at a 7.5. A few days later was another doubleheader, starting off with Sacramento. And if you had told me that a movie starring Will Stronghold from Sky High would be a shitty best friend to Scott Pilgrim, whose wife, Bella Swan, is back at home pregnant with their first child, was going to be good, I probably would have laughed in your face, but it was fantastic. What I thought was going to be a cute buddy comedy movie that teaches its characters how to deal with grief was actually a lot more than that, and I'm glad it was. Everyone in the cast, small as it was, did a fantastic job in their parts, especially Michael Cera in what I believe is his first semi-serious role either ever or at least in a very long while. Michael Angarano is absolutely phenomenal in his role as well, playing a childish friend that has to grow up too fast for his own good. I guess my only gripe with the story as a whole is how quickly things went off the rails as soon as the pair gets to the titular city in California, but otherwise, it was a very good movie, and I would highly recommend it to anyone who is looking for a nice, semi calm movie to just relax with and only stress out a little bit. Okay, maybe a lot, but it was still well deserving of a 9 out of 10. Following the stress of friendship was a different kind of stress entirely, finishing up the doubleheader with Warfare. A bit of a tangent before the actual review, but you know how back in like World War One or Two, the term for PTSD was shell shock? Yeah, that was me after seeing this movie because holy shit. This movie is exactly as its name implies and is all the better for it. I understand that this movie isn't for everyone, especially those that are in the military or have served overseas in these kinds of events, but my god, this was absolutely stunning to watch. From the no-nonsense dialogue to the brutality of the injuries, and the fact that they didn't shy away from some of the shittier aspects of war, it was just a perfect movie that encapsulated what it truly was and is to be a soldier. Even the more mundane aspects of the movie, like jamming out before the mission or relaying information to higher-ups, was engaging, and when shit truly hits the fan, my attention was on the screen for the remainder of the movie. Just absolutely stunning, and definitely a movie that I am elated to have seen, but will not be seeing it again. Also, something that I didn't clock until the very end was that there was no score from the end of the beginning jam out scene to the credits. It was insane. In the simplest of terms, holy shit, please go watch this movie. An easy 11 out of 10. Even though it could never compare to the one that I saw before it, up next was The Amateur. And honestly, I think this movie shined more when it was Rami Malek doing his nerd shit in the CIA's basement than it did when he was running around Europe trying to do his thing. I was more intrigued with his knowledge of how he did what he did, rather than seeing him set up these elaborate Rube Goldberg machine-style traps for each individual involved in his wife's murder. Aside from that, though, I think this movie was good, but not great. But I couldn't really tell you why for any real reason. It was easy enough to follow along with, though the ending didn't really feel right, but I won't say why here for spoiler reasons. The acting from everyone was great, from Rami Malek to Lawrence Fishburne, though I feel like even if you had those two reading from a phone book, they could still make it intriguing. Again, just overall, this had potential and it hit some of the notes, but not all of them, so it's going to get a solid 7 out of 10. After that was the second horror movie set at a camp, Marshmallow. First off, I will say that having a movie where the majority of the characters, and therefore actors, are tweens is always going to be a toss-up on whether or not they're good, and Marshmallow mostly succeeded. Like, it wasn't terrible by any means, but it also wasn't as good as it could have been, though that wasn't really the fault of the actors. No, I'd say that's the result of the absolutely insane ending they decided to throw at the audience despite not really building up to it at all or explaining why or how anything actually worked. The setting of a summer camp was a nice change of pace from the cityscape of most horror movies, but the one thing that threw me off the most was a random sex scene between two of the counselors that was just really unnecessary and added absolutely nothing to the story or what was happening around them. It just made me confused as to why it was put there and was just a weird inclusion in general. All things told, it was pretty decent, so it's going to get a 6.5 out of 10. The second screen unseen of the month brought us to the past to watch On Swift Horses, starring Daisy Edgar Jones, Will Poulter, Sasha Kaye, and Jacob Elordi. But, I mean, come on. More like On Slow Horses, am I right? Seriously, this movie chugged along about as fast as me getting out of bed in the morning before my last alarm. It didn't help that everyone's performances were so stiff and wooden that it just felt rough to watch at points. On a technical level, it was incredibly basic and lackluster, and it just felt like a waste of 2 hours of my time. Plus, at the point where damn near everyone in the movie is such a shitty person with no redeeming qualities, it gets hard to root for anyone, which just makes it that much harder to want to finish watching the movie. The only good part was Will Poulter, but again, even a mostly wooden performance from him wasn't going to save this movie. 2.5 feels generous, but that's what it's going to get. I don't know if it was specifically my theater or the distribution company, but one of them was a smartass and gave us a tax day showing of The Accountant 2, starring Ben Affleck and Jon Bernthal. And in terms of sequels that were made after nearly all hype for the original died down, The Accountant 2 is actually pretty good, and it does what all sequels should do. It builds on the world created in the first one by bringing back characters from the original and building on their characters while also giving us a fresh story. Ben Affleck and Jon Bernthal were fantastic as the brothers, and I felt like their chemistry really felt like they were actual brothers, not just acting like it. The only downside for this movie is that it felt more like an action movie than the first one did, leaning more toward big action set pieces than the investigative work that the first movie did fairly well. While that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially for a sequel, it missed out on the whole reason the first one worked, and it kind of brings this one down, though not by a whole lot. Overall, though, it was a fantastic movie, and I hope they make a third one, though I hope it doesn't take them another 9 years to do so. Not sure how well this calculates out, but it's going to get an 8.5 out of 10. Now, I'm not quite sure how to intro this next movie, especially because it was much more of an impulse watch than literally anything else this month or this year so far, but I ended up seeing Colorful Stage the movie, a Miku who can't sing. But I will say, knowing what little I knew about Hatsune Miku in general, this film was just phenomenal. I hadn't even considered seeing it until I realized that I had the free time, and I am so glad that I actually saw it. The animation was stunning, the music was an absolute bop, no surprise there, and the story and its message were beautiful. If I could erase my memory of having seen this just to see it again, I absolutely would. The only downside to this, which wasn't even that much of a downside, is that it seemed overly filled with characters and plot lines to follow. At any given point, I think there were 5 different groups of people that the story followed that had nothing in common until the very end, so it was a bit hard to keep track of everything, even to the point of not knowing who any of the characters were or are at the end of the movie, save for the Vocaloids, and even then, I don't know anything about them. However, that really didn't affect my enjoyment of the movie all that much, and it was still an amazing movie with amazing music and an amazing message. Have I said amazing a lot? I feel like I have, but that's just how amazing this movie was, so it'll get a 10 out of 10. After getting my fill of music from Ms. Miku, I partook in the Easter season to watch The King of Kings, the latest retelling of the Jesus story, and it was your fairly typical telling of the story of Jesus' life, but this time told as a story from Charles Dickens to his son, and honestly, it's all the better for it. Because it's being told as a story, the audience is able to get more of an understanding of it from the viewpoint of the son. I will say that the animation style was very strange, with the modern characters in Charles and Walter, the son, being very round, while every character within the story was very blocky and angular. At the same time, Oscar Isaac, who played Jesus in the movie, was almost too calm in his portrayal that it felt like he didn't want to be there. Everyone else did fine, with arguably the most stacked cast for small roles, including Pierce Brosnan as Pontius Pilate, Forrest Whitaker as Peter, one of the disciples, and Mark Hamill as King Herod. It was just so strange, but it worked so well for some reason. As said at the beginning, though, it was a fairly typical telling, but in this case at least, that's not a bad thing. So it will get a respectable 7 out of 10. Up next was the first Norwegian movie I think I've ever seen, being The Ugly Stepsister, a body horror retelling of the Cinderella story. I will admit, though, that it was disappointing for like 80% of the body horror in this movie to be shown in the trailer. And granted, yes, it is a more faithful retelling of the Cinderella fairy tale than anything Disney would ever think of doing, but it was still fairly tame, all things considered. That isn't to say that the body horror that was shown wasn't good. It did get me pretty good at times, and I like to think that I'm not that squeamish. Leah Myron did a fantastic job in her role as the titular ugly stepsister, showing the slow descent into madness and trying to change your exterior appearance for the sake of love, even going to certain extremes as shown throughout the film. It was really interesting to get the story of Cinderella told through the perspective of one of the stepsisters, though the use of the name Cinderella in the movie itself just felt thrown in there to make sure that there were no questions about what this fairy tale was. Still a very good movie though, and if you can handle reading subtitles while listening to Norwegian, I would highly recommend it. It'll get a 7 out of 10, though I hope no one tries to beautify themselves like she did in the movie to get me to change that rating. The final screen unseen for the month kicked off the final doubleheader as well, with The Legend of Ochi being the unknown movie that wasn't painfully obvious in that it was the only PG movie that was releasing for a good month or so. But that's beside the point. With that bit out of the way, first things first, if you're going to make a movie where the kid-friendly monsters have a cute voice that makes overtones when they sing together, please make sure that the mixing is right so you don't blow out the eardrums of everyone in attendance. It got so loud in the theater that I was in that I almost had to plug my ears to keep watching it. For the rest of the movie, though, it was pretty decent. The story was good, the acting was okay, especially from Helena Zengel, the lead actress for the movie. The music was just okay, though the reliance on the flute for most of the music ended up tying back to the story, so that was a really neat inclusion on the part of the composer and writer. Overall, though, it was just slightly better than okay. It wasn't something great that I recommend seeing immediately, but it wasn't something so terrible that I would recommend avoiding with your time and money. It was just okay, so it'll get an okay score of 6 out of 10. Finishing up that doubleheader was one of the best movies that I have seen so far this year, or in the entire time that I've been going to movies, honestly. Sinners, starring Michael B. Jordan and Haley Steinfeld, and directed by Ryan Coogler. As with Warfare, I just have one thing to say before I get to the actual review. Holy shit. Just wow. Sinners was absolutely amazing, and for an original story to have the success that it's seeing is very refreshing in this day and age, where everything is either a sequel or a reboot. The whole of the cast was fantastic, with specific shoutouts to Michael B. Jordan for taking on the dual role of Smoke and Stack, twins in a movie that reminded me of the Lindsay Lohan Parent Trap movie because of how it was shot, and to Miles Cotton for being damn near perfect in his acting, despite this being his first ever acting credit. Just phenomenal work from everyone in the cast and crew. The dialogue was perfect, mixing what we think of as modern banter between siblings and friends, and dialogue that was more fitting of the 1930s settings that the movie takes place in. Plus, the whole thing is centered around one location for one night for most of the action, which immediately gets a massive thumbs up from me. It was just perfect, and I would highly, highly recommend this to anyone who enjoys vampire movies, good blues music, or just a fantastic story in general. It gets the second 11 out of 10 for the month and year, and very much deservedly so. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, which in this case was movies with a personal rating of 6 or higher, as I ended up putting myself through Until Dawn, the latest in Sony's attempt to bring their games to the silver screen. And as good as I wanted this movie to be, unfortunately, the quality did not reach any higher than the second shelf from the bottom. About the only good thing I can think of to compliment for this movie is the set design and the monster design, but even then, the monster designs are ripped almost straight from the game, so they already had something good to draw from. Everything else, though, was bad, either just kinda bad or laughably bad, including one of the death scenes from the middle of the movie. I know comparing it to the game is not what this movie needs, But when the title is the same as the game, the opening credits say that it's made by PlayStation Studios, and the credits say that it's based on the game itself, you can't help but draw the comparisons, and as a comparison, easily a 1 out of 10, only because of Peter Stormare and a half-second blink and you'll miss it Easter egg with 10 minutes left in the movie pre-credits. On its own merits, though, it's just not a good horror movie either, relying too much on jump scares over suspense and real horror, and the acting felt like something out of a soap opera rather than a horror movie. It's getting a 2 out of 10, which honestly is more than I should give it, but that's where it's going to go for now. Second to last for the month was Neighborhood Watch, starring Jack Quaid and Jeffrey Dean Morgan. While it wasn't as good as I had hoped it would be, it was still a decent enough movie to, at the very least, keep my attention the whole time. Jack Quaid and Jeffrey Dean Morgan played well off of each other, with Morgan's character acting as a grounding method for Quaid's character. The story was fine, fairly predictable and easy to guess, but in this kind of movie, I think that's okay, honestly. The premise itself is kind of whack, especially the bit about the police thinking that Quaid's character is just going on some rampage until the very end, but it mostly works, I guess. I just wish that there had been some more of an explanation of Quaid's character's mental illness or some of the hallucinations, if only to give the viewer more to sympathize with. But other than that, there was nothing more I could ask for from this movie. From its predictability to its lack of explanation for most anything, I want to give it more than a 6 out of 10, but that's all I can muster for right now. Last but not least was my first ever David Cronenberg movie, The Shrouds. Though if they're all like this one, I think I'm okay skipping his previous works. The vibes of this movie going into it were great, and for the majority of the runtime, it stayed at the quality that I thought it would have. The last little bit of it, though, leaves way too many questions unanswered, and the questions that the movie does answer use the the person answering the question is crazy, so don't believe them method that just leaves those very same questions unanswered. The seemingly straightforward mystery plot is drawn out and overplayed, while there are multiple scenes that felt like they didn't need to be in the movie itself. While I understand that Cronenberg movies are supposed to be unsettling and make you ask questions, the only question this made me ask coming out of it was this: if not for the name of the director, would this have been made? And I'll tell you the answer to that one, probably not. For a first-timer, not a great impression and not a great movie, so it'll get a 2.5 from me. In the month of April, I saw a total of 22 movies for an average rating of 6.8. I walked into 3 of those movies not knowing what they were, being Drop, On Swift Horses, and The Legend of Ochi. Once again, I did have to pay for quite a few of those, with only 12 free tickets to my name, but I did still save $156.41 compared to the $108.41 that I spent. To quickly recap the order of quality of movies from top to bottom, according to me, we had Warfare and Sinners tied at 11, The Friend and a Miku Who Can't Sing tied at 10, Sacramento at 9, Luckiest Man and The Accountant 2 tied at 8.5, The Amateur and Drop tied at 7.5, The Ugly Stepsister and The King of Kings tied at 7, Marshmallow and Freaky Tales tied at 6.5, The Legend of Ochi and Neighborhood Watch tied at 6, Screamboat at 4.5, Hell of a Summer at 4, a Minecraft movie at 3.5, The Shrouds and On Swift Horses at 2.5, Until Dawn at 2, and The Woman in the Yard at 0. As with the last few videos, if you have any movies that you want my full opinions on, spoilers and everything, feel free to ask in the comments, and it may or may not happen depending on how long these videos actually take to make. With all the movies tallied up, I have now seen a total of 62 movies so far this year. Damn. Up next will be the month of May, where at the time of writing the script, I've already seen 3 movies, with another 6 or 7 on the docket for the next release day, so we should have another long one in store for next time. Until then, I'll see you in the next one, and who knows, maybe you'll take me up on a recommendation or two and see something that I saw. Happy viewing.